next up is Lee Ohanian. Lee is a professor at UCLA, and he's going to tell us all about big issues in housing in California and maybe why your houses are so expensive to live here. So, Lee.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. I'm delighted to join you today and share some ideas with you about two of our most pressing challenges that we face in California: housing affordability and homelessness. And I promised Peter I would do this in under 20 minutes. So I'll begin with housing. And to frame this, I'll discuss a couple of statistics, one of which is that the median California home is priced at about $884,000. This is about 115% higher than the median national average. These data are from the California Association of Realtors and the National Association of Realtors. And in terms of affordability, you can just imagine what that means. The California Realtors Association estimates that only about 16% of California households can afford that median-priced home in our state, whereas about 50% of households across the nation can afford the median national price home. And of course, in Santa Barbara, it's much more challenging. We have a $1.4 million median priced home in the county, and while I haven't seen specific estimates for affordability locally here, I suspect it's probably somewhere in the 8 to 12% range. Now, it's tempting to conclude that housing costs in California are high simply because of just the remarkable place we live in with the amenities that we enjoy, for example, today. But the amenities have always been with us. But for many years, California housing was much more affordable than it is today. So let me show you a figure. And in this figure, this bar here is that 115% price premium between California's median home and the national average median home that we have today. And then these other bars, this is 1970, 1960, 1950, and 1940. And you'll notice that the California housing price premium in those years was much, much lower. It averages only about 28% higher than the national average. And what's particularly striking is that population growth during this period in California was just remarkable. Our state grew from about 7 million in 1940 to about 20 million in 1970. So we tripled the size of the state, yet despite that enormous increase in demand, the relative premium really did not move very much. When we look at what's going on today with this enormous premium, the state's population really hasn't budged much. It's only grown about 2% in the last 10 years. So this is not simply a story about everyone wanting to live in California. Now, what happened? These data really just jump out at us and say, what happened? Well, housing costs essentially mirror the cost of building. And a big difference between today and what we saw during that 40 to 70 period is that building regulations rose enormously during that period of time. And that drives up building costs, and when building costs go up, housing costs go up. And there are many regulations that have come into play over the last 40 to 50 years. One I'll focus on today are environmental regulations, including the California Environmental Quality Act, which was passed in 1970. And this was shortly after we had the oil spill out in our channel in 1969 that made world headlines. And the idea behind CEQA, C-E-Q-A, the idea behind CEQA was give us tools so we could be responsible environmental stewards for today and into the future. And it's certainly a very well-intentioned law, but sometimes that law is used to prevent or delay development. And I'll give you just what I think is perhaps the most telling example, which is a proposed development called Newhall Ranch, just outside Valencia, about 70 miles from here. And in 1994, developers submitted plans for this community called Newhall Ranch. It was going to be literally a new city of 60,000 people. It took 27 years to build the first homes. Not until 2021 were the first homes Newhall Ranch built, because there was just a series of regulatory barriers and environmental lawsuits that developers had to deal with during this period of time. My understanding is that perhaps more than one developer was bankrupted through this process. You can just imagine how such a time delay, as well as legal costs and expenses, would drive up housing, and that's exactly what we see. These homes are now for sale, and they sell for as much as $2.8 million. So we want to facilitate development. We want to build efficiently, but we have some impediments that make it very difficult to do that. Now, policymakers throughout the state, they understand very well we face an affordability challenge. And in fact, over 100 new housing laws have been passed in Sacramento over the last few years to try to create new housing and reduce costs. But they haven't really moved the needle, because unless you reduce the cost of building, we cannot legitimately reduce the cost of California housing. And to put that in perspective, there are fewer private building permits being issued today than there were before many of these laws were passed. So these laws are just missing the mark. What we really need to be able to do is to reduce the costs of creating new housing. Now, another issue that I don't think has worked very well within our state policy planning process for housing is what's known as the regional housing needs allocations. And the reason I don't think it has worked very well is because it's very much a top-down framework in which Sacramento tells regional governments how much housing each region needs to build. And then there's a back and forth between Sacramento and regional governments about where that housing is going to go. And what another issue that concerns me is that being a top-down program, it reduces the amount of local control the communities have over how they wish to live. And it also results in low-income housing being placed into locations that just don't make a lot of economic sense. So, for example, up in San Mateo County, Atherton, California is, I believe it's the most expensive zip code in the country. The median home price is about $7.8 million. Atherton is trying to figure out how to build new housing, including apartment units in that location. And because Atherton is such an affluent area, households with incomes in excess of $200,000 are going to be able to live in subsidized housing. And if you think about a household with over $200,000 of income, they're very close to the top. So this just doesn't make an awful lot of economic sense. But there's a better way, in my opinion. So let me just spend a couple of moments and talk about that. 3, what I think are kind of simple, common sense steps towards building new housing. The first is that we need to revisit our regulatory framework, such as the California Environmental Quality Act, not to eviscerate it, but to make modifications where it makes sense so we can reduce building costs in order to reduce housing costs. If we can't reduce building costs, we simply cannot reduce housing costs. Some developers I know have told me, developers who work in California and also other states, they've told me that in some areas of California, building costs can actually be twice as high as they are in neighboring states such as Arizona and Nevada. Another issue is that we need to facilitate building in areas where land is somewhat more affordable. Most of our state is unoccupied. About 90% of our population in California lives on just 5% of the land. So there is room to spread out. And to give you an example, the fastest growing community in California over the last year is a community called Shafter, which is about 20 miles outside of Bakersfield. Land is much more affordable there, and as a result, they're able to create new housing with a median price of about $370,000 compared to the state's average of $884,000. And when it comes to urban areas and think about housing there, if I look at Los Angeles, there are about 33,000 vacant lots in LA, some of which have been vacant for as many as 60 years. Now, these are eyesores, so let's prioritize building in those locations. And 33,000 vacant lots can substantially expand housing supply in Los Angeles. But we can even do better than this. We can do better than a $370,000 home, which is what we're looking at in Shafter, California. We can also lever the efficiency of modern building technologies. So we can now build homes from start to finish within factories, exploiting the cost efficiencies of mass production. And this can economize on building costs by at least 50%, and I suspect here in California maybe closer to 60 or 70%. And my estimates suggest that we can create housing at about $250,000, perhaps less than that, provided we're building not so close to the coast where land is just extremely valuable and expensive. Now, this to me seems all like very simple common sense. Sacramento is a different animal. I know the attorney who shepherded Newhall Ranch through many years of that complicated litigation process, and what she has told me is that virtually almost every day of the week, her office in Sacramento, almost every day of the week, she's in the state capitol trying to get movement on some of these regulatory issues. Unfortunately, it's been slow going. Okay, let me talk a bit about homelessness. Homelessness is rising within the state, despite the fact that we've spent an awful lot on it. Right now, there's the official number for California homelessness is about 186,000. That's up about 60% since 2015. The Legislative Analyst's Office has been looking at other data sources, and they think that the number of homeless might be as many as 400,000 measured throughout the year. That 186,000 number comes from a one-night point-in-time count that's done each year, and it's widely agreed that this potentially misses many of the homeless. And it's not as if we haven't spent on this problem. We've invested $37 billion in homeless programs and housing since 2019, and yet homelessness is increasing. So again, I feel like a lot of my talk here is asking what went wrong. So here we have another time where we're going to ask what went wrong. And I think there's really two issues here that are noteworthy. One is that our homelessness apparatus merits better stewardship, oversight, management, and accountability. And so what I've put here are some quotes from a recent audit of California homelessness spending by the state auditor's office. And you can read faster than I can talk, but the quotes are really quite damning in terms of the lack of the application of standard cost accounting, financial reporting principles. And we're talking about just tens of billions of dollars here. And long story short, there's an awful lot of money where we just don't know where it went. And I think we all agree this is just unacceptable. But it's not just the California auditor. a federal audit was done of California homelessness spending, and the federal audit concluded that our homeless investments didn't have adequate fraud safeguards built in to protect the $320 million that we received from the federal government. And now this is particularly noteworthy after our Employment and Development Department was hacked for possibly as much as $32 billion as a result of antiquated IT architecture. The second issue is that, in my opinion, our approach to homelessness needs to be reframed within the context of what's a sensible scope of what we do, and also incentivize personal responsibility. I think of homelessness and protecting against homelessness as part of our social safety net. The social safety net is essentially social insurance that we would like to have, but we can't buy in private insurance markets. So we can go out and buy auto insurance, and therefore governments don't offer auto insurance. But we can't go out and buy unemployment insurance in private insurance markets. So we offer that as part of the social safety net. And any successful insurance program is going to explicitly define what life events or events are going to be covered, and also incentivize responsible behavior. Otherwise, these programs become unaffordable and they spiral out of control. Our program has become unaffordable. The budget has exploded. Some apartment buildings are being built for the homeless at a cost of $1 million or more per unit. And just keep in mind the median home price in the country of a little over $400,000, plus you have a yard to enjoy. Now, this is a picture of a mansion, an estate in Florida that's owned by Jeff Bezos. It's on a man-made island. It's one of, I think, only 40 houses on this island. The cost per square foot, for example, the cost I just mentioned to you, the cost per square foot of our most expensive housing that's called affordable housing or for the homeless, it's not quite at the level of Jeff Bezos' mansion, but it's not so far away. So when we talk about insurance or programs that incentivize responsible behavior, for an awful long time, our approach to dealing with homelessness was followed kind of two principles. One was called harm reduction, which is, as a society, we should accept substance use as a lifestyle choice, and housing first, which means we provide permanent housing to the homeless, irregardless of whether they're sober or not, or irregardless of whether they're entering treatment. And this is a picture of San Francisco. The image is taken, I believe that's the Lick Pioneer Memorial. The public library is on the right side. The UN pavilion is not far from us. This is a city that's just really just been overwhelmed with homelessness. So for a long time, I don't think our policies really recognized that there is a causal link between psychiatric disorders and substance abuse and being homeless. And you see that in the fact that we simply don't have enough treatment beds in place within California. So when we think about what we should do, we need to invest in treatment facilities and, in my opinion, prioritize treatment over expensive permanent housing, because we want these individuals to exit dependency. And we also should focus on reuniting them with family. This is oftentimes some of the most successful ways we can go about this. And we also need to improve our average K-12 schooling within the state. And not just teaching kids about the dangers of drugs, but improving average school quality. Only about 25% of California kids are proficient or advanced at grade level math, just about 1 out of 4. And some of those, if they're not going to get better education, will become the new homeless. And the human cost of this is staggering. Just in San Francisco alone, 3,462 overdose deaths in the last 5 years. Final remarks. We need to recognize that some who want to live in California, and particularly near the coast, don't have the economic means to do that. We can't realistically provide housing for all current and future Californians who can't afford to live in California. But we can create much more affordable housing so those without super high incomes can afford to live in California. And we also need to accept the fact that living in a free society, which we so dearly love, requires an enormous amount of personal responsibility and contributing to your community in some way. If our safety net is consistent with these ideas, then we can succeed at a higher rate, we can save lives, and I think we can improve the quality of life for all. Thank you so much.
One question for you. One question.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was great, Lee. Have you seen any movement on the regulatory front in the state?
So with respect to the California Environmental Quality Act, there's been all sorts of workarounds, and many laws have been passed modifying it. They just haven't really moved the needle. There is a proposal within Sacramento to exempt urban buildings from environmental review. I would prefer it if we simply continued with environmental review, but we just made it a lot more common sense so it didn't delay things so long and just drive up builders' costs. So it's glacial, but hopefully.
Okay, great. One more thing.
Yeah.
Do you think it's appropriate to wear tennis shoes at an event like this?
Well, only if we're supporting local business.
Thank you.